course, I hated all my fellow office workers, from the first to the last, and despised every one of them. Yet, at the same time, it was as if I were afraid of them. Sometimes it happened that I would even regard them as superior to me. At this time, these changes would suddenly occur. First, I would despise them, then I would regard them as superior to me. A cultured and decent man cannot be vain without making unlimited demands on himself and without hating himself, at times to the point of contempt. But whether hating them or regarding them as superior, I almost always lowered my eyes when meeting anyone. I even conducted experiments. Could I endure someone's gaze? I'd always be the first to lower my eyes. This infuriated me to the point of madness. I slavishly worshipped convention in all external things. I embraced the common practice and feared any eccentricity with all my soul. But how could I sustain it? I was morbidly refined, as befits any cultured man of our time. All others resembled one another as as sheep in a flock. Perhaps I was the only one in the whole office who constantly thought of himself as a coward and a slave, and I thought so precisely because I was so cultured. But not only did I think so, it was actually so. I was a coward and a slave. I say this without any embarrassment. Any decent man of our time is and must be a coward and a slave. This is his normal condition. I'm deeply convinced of it. This is how he's made and what he's meant to be, and not only at the present time as a result of some accidental circumstance, but in general at all times. A decent man must be a coward and a slave. This is a law of nature for all decent men on earth. If one of them should happen to be brave about something or other, we shouldn't be comforted or distracted. He'll simply lose his nerve about something else. That's the single and eternal way out. Only asses and their mongrels are brave, and even then, only until they come up against a wall. It's not worthwhile paying them any attention because they really don't mean anything at all. There was one more circumstance tormenting me at that time. No one was like me, and I wasn't like anyone else. I'm alone, I mused, and they are everyone. And I sank deep into thought. From all this, it's clear that I was still just a boy. The exact opposite would also occur. Sometimes I would find it repulsive to go to the office. It reached the point where I would often return home from work ill. Then suddenly, for no good reason at all, a flash of skepticism and indifference would set in. Everything came to me in flashes. I would laugh at my own intolerance and fastidiousness and reproach myself for my romanticism. Sometimes I didn't even want to talk to anyone. At other times, it reached a point where I not only started talking, but I even thought about striking up a friendship with others. All my fastidiousness would suddenly disappear for no good reason at all. Who knows? Perhaps I never really had any, and it was all affected, borrowed from books. I still haven't answered this question, even up till now. And once I really did become friends with others. I began to visit their houses, play preference, drink vodka, talk about promotions, but allow me to digress. We Russians, generally speaking, have never had any of those stupid, transcendent German romantics, or even worse, French romantics, on whom nothing produces any effect whatsoever. The earth might tremble beneath them, all of France might perish on the barricades, but they'd remain the same, not even changing for decency's sake. They go on singing their transcendent songs, so to speak, to their dying day, because they're such fools. We here on Russian soil have no fools. It's a well-known fact. That's precisely what distinguishes us from foreigners. Consequently, transcendent natures cannot be found among us in their pure form. That's the result of our positive publicists and critics of that period, who hunted for the Kostanzglos and the Uncle Pyotr Ivanoviches, foolishly mistaking them for our ideal and slandering our own romantics, considering them to be the same kind of transcendence as one finds in Germany or France. On the contrary, the characteristics of our romantics are absolutely and directly opposed to the transcendent Europeans. Not one of those European standards can apply here. Allow me to use the word romantic. It's an old-fashioned little word, well respected and deserving, familiar to everyone. The characteristics of our romantics are to understand everything, to see everything, often to see it much more clearly than our most positive minds, not to be reconciled with anyone or anything, but at the same time not to balk at anything, to circumvent everything, to yield on every point, to treat everyone diplomatically, never to lose sight of some useful practical goal, an apartment at government expense, a nice pension, a decoration, to keep an eye on that goal through all his excesses and his volumes of lyrical verse, at the same time to preserve intact the beautiful and sublime to the end of their lives, and incidentally to preserve themselves as well, wrapped up in cotton like precious jewelry, if only, for example, for the sake of that same beautiful and sublime. Our romantic has a very broad nature, and is the biggest rogue of all. I can assure you of that, even by my own experience. Of course, all of this is true if the romantic is smart. But what am I saying? A romantic is always smart. I merely wanted to observe that although we've had some romantic fools, they really don't count at all, simply because while still in their prime, they would degenerate completely into Germans, and in order to preserve their precious jewels more comfortably, they'd settle over there, either in Weimar or in the Black Forest. For instance, I genuinely despise my official position and refrain from quitting merely out of necessity, because I myself sat there working, and received good money for doing it. And as a result, please note, I still refrain from quitting. A romantic would sooner lose his mind, which, by the way, very rarely occurs, than quit, if he didn't have another job in mind. Nor is he ever thrown out unless he's hauled off to the insane asylum as the King of Spain, and only if he's gone completely mad. Then again, it's really only the weaklings and towheads who go mad in our country. An enormous number of romantics later rise to significant rank. What extraordinary versatility! And what a capacity for the most contradictory sensations! I used to be consoled by these thoughts back then, and still am even nowadays. That's why there are so many broad natures among us, people who never lose their ideals, no matter how low they fall, even though they never lift a finger for the sake of their ideals. Even though they're outrageous villains and thieves, nevertheless they respect their original ideals to the point of tears and are extremely honest men at heart. Yes, only among us Russians can the most outrageous scoundrel be absolutely, even sublimely honest at heart, while at the same time never ceasing to be a scoundrel. I repeat, nearly always do our romantics turn out to be very efficient rascals. I use the word rascal affectionately. They suddenly manifest such a sense of reality and positive knowledge that their astonished superiors and the general public can only click their tongues at them in amazement. Their versatility is really astounding. God only knows what it will turn into, how it will develop under subsequent conditions, and what it holds for us in the future. The material is not that bad. I am not saying this out of some ridiculous patriotism or jingoism. However, I'm quite sure that once again you think I'm joking. But who knows, perhaps it's really quite the contrary. That is, you're convinced that this is what I really think. In any case, gentlemen, I consider that both of these opinions constitute an honor and a particular pleasure, and do forgive me for this digression. Naturally, I didn't sustain any friendships with my colleagues, and soon I severed all relations after quarreling with them, and because of my youthful inexperience at that same time, I even stopped greeting them, as if I'd cut them off entirely. That, however, happened to me only once. On the whole, I was always alone. At home, I spent most of my time reading. I tried to stifle all that was constantly seething within me with external sensations, and of all external sensations available, only reading was possible for me. Of course, reading helped a great deal. It agitated, delighted, and tormented me, but at times it was terribly boring. I still longed to be active, and suddenly I sank into dark, subterranean, loathsome depravity, more precisely, petty vice. My nasty little passions were sharp and painful as a result of my constant morbid irritability. I experienced hysterical fits accompanied by tears and convulsions. Besides reading, I had nowhere else to go. That is, there was nothing to respect in my surroundings, nothing to attract me. In addition, I was overwhelmed by depression. I possessed a hysterical craving for contradictions and contrasts, and as a result, I plunged into depravity. I haven't said all this to justify myself, but no, I'm lying. I did want to justify myself. It's for myself, gentlemen, that I include this little observation. I don't want to lie. I've given my word. I indulged in depravity all alone, at night, fervidly, timidly, sordidly, with a feeling of shame that never left me even in my loathsome moments, and drove me at such times to the point of profanity. Even then I was carrying around the underground in my soul. I was terribly afraid of being seen, met, recognized. I visited all sorts of dismal places. Once, passing by some wretched little tavern late at night, I saw through a lighted window some gentlemen fighting with billiard cues. One of them was thrown out of the window. At some other time I would have been disgusted, but just then I was overcome by such a mood that I envied the gentleman who'd been tossed out. I had envied him so much that I even walked into the tavern and entered the billiard room. Perhaps, I thought, I'll get into a fight and they'll throw me out the window too. I wasn't drunk, but what I could do, after all, depression can drive a man to this. I wasn't drunk, but what could I do? After all, depression can drive a man to this kind of hysteria. But nothing came of it. It turned out that I wasn't capable of getting tossed out the window. I left without having a fight. As soon as I set foot inside, some officer put me in my place. I was standing next to the billiard table, inadvertently blocking his way as he wanted to get by. He took hold of me by the shoulders, and without a word of warning or explanation, moved me from where I was standing to another place. And he went past as if he hadn't even noticed me. I could have forgiven even a beating, but I could never forgive his moving me out of the way and entirely failing to notice me. The devil knows what I would have given for a genuine, ordinary quarrel, a decent one, a more literary one, so to speak. But I had been treated as if I were a fly. The officer was about 6 feet tall, while I'm small and scrawny. The quarrel, however, was in my hands. All I had to do was protest, and of course they would have thrown me out of the window. But I reconsidered and preferred to withdraw resentfully. I left the tavern confused and upset and went straight home. The next night I continued my petty vice more timidly, more fervently, more gloomily than before, as if I had tears in my eyes, but I continued nonetheless. Don't conclude, however, that I retreated from that officer as a result of any cowardice. I've never been a coward at heart, although I've constantly acted like one indeed. But, wait before you laugh. I can explain this. I can explain anything, you may rest assured. Oh, if only this officer had been the kind who'd agreed to fight a duel. But no, he was precisely one of those types, alas long gone, who preferred to act with their billiard cues, or like Gogol's Lieutenant Pirogov, by appealing to the authorities. They didn't fight duels, in any case. They'd considered fighting a duel with someone like me, a lowly civilian, to be indecent. In general, they consider duels to be somehow inconceivable, free-thinking, French, while they themselves, especially if they happened to be 6 feet tall, offended other people quite frequently.